In the 1420s, two brothers began work on what would become one of the most important paintings in the Western world. Little could they know as they began the massive, multi-paneled work that travails that it would go through in hundreds of years of war and strife, only to survive almost intact into the modern day. It was transformative in its time, considered by many art historians to be the first major oil painting, and it has been admired by millions of people since it was created. So admired, in fact, that it has become famous as one of the most stolen works of art in the world. And among its many thefts, one stands out because it is the only time that a piece of this amazing work was stolen, never to be returned. It is a historical whodunit that deserves to be remembered.
The Ghent altarpiece, properly titled The Adoration of the Mystic Lamb, was commissioned in the 1420s by the mayor of the Flemish city of Ghent, Jodocus Vage, and his wife Lisbeth. Both were members of powerful families, and Jodocus was one of the most politically powerful men of the city. In this period, Ghent was one of the largest and most important cities in all of Europe. In the 13th century, it had become the second largest city in Europe north of the Alps, second only to Paris, and it was larger than either Cologne or Moscow. As many as 65,000 people lived within the city's walls, and while it was nominally part of the Burgundian state, the city was powerful and wealthy enough to be ruled essentially as a city-state. It became wealthy especially through the wool trade and the production of cloth, and became heavily industrialized in the High Middle Ages. The Adoration of the Mystic Lamb is huge, made up of 12 panels arranged in 2 registers or levels. The individual panels can be closed, and on its outer panels are another 8 panels. Fully open, the piece measures 5.2 meters by 3.75 meters, or roughly 17 feet by 12 feet 4 inches. Altogether, the large panels with their paintings weigh 2.5 tons. According to a now-lost inscription that had been on the frame, the piece was created by 2 brothers, Hubert and Jan van Eyck. Jan is considerably more famous, and was considered even in his own time as one of the best painters of the era. Jan, however, left an inscription, now lost, that credits Hubert as major quo nemo repertus, greater than anyone, and Jan as arte secundus, or second best in art. Its construction and planning in the 1420s are generally thought to have been carried out by Hubert, who died in 1426, leaving the piece to be completed by Jan in 1432. Whatever the circumstances of its painting, by 1432 it was displayed in the St. Bravo Cathedral. Originally, the altarpiece also included a large carved outer frame and surround, which may have included clockwork mechanisms which could move the shutters or play music. This outer frame was destroyed during the Reformation, and little information about it survives. When open, 12 panels depict hundreds of figures. In the top register, there's at the center Christ, flanked by the Virgin Mary and John the Baptist. The next panels out depict heavenly choirs, and the outermost depict a naked Adam and Eve. The lower register holds a single scene depicting hundreds of figures surrounding a lamb. Full of Christian iconography, the panels are painted with incredible detail, and when closed, 8 panels are displayed, painted less vibrantly to contrast with the inner images and depicting more religious figures.
In general, the altarpiece remained closed except on feast days.
Even in its earliest days, the piece was coveted as a symbol of wealth and power, was moved numerous times, has been the victim of significant crime and theft. A fire in the 16th century destroyed the painting's platform, which had depicted hell, and during the Protestant Reformation, the entire piece was removed from the church to save it from the Great Iconoclasm, in which groups destroyed various religious images and paintings as heretical. The work was plundered during the French Revolution and exhibited at the Louvre until it was returned in 1815 after Napoleon's defeat at Waterloo. Much of the painting was then pawned for a pittance by the Diocese of Ghent, and would be sold eventually to King Frederick William III of Prussia and displayed in the Berlin Museum. Some panels remained in Ghent, but were seized by German forces during World War I. The Treaty of Versailles stipulated the return of the entire work in compensation for acts of destruction during the war. Despite its harrowing journeys, the paintings themselves remained intact by 1934 and in the same location where they had originally been installed more than 500 years before in Ghent. All of that changed on the morning of April 11th, 1934. That day, a steward at the church began his morning rounds when he noticed that the door to the chapel had been left unlocked. When he entered, fearful of what he might find, it appeared nothing was amiss. It wasn't until later that he removed the cover from the altarpiece to find that one of the panels of the great painting was missing. A note was left behind in the frame that said, "Taken from Germany by the Treaty of Versailles."
The Germans simply were not happy that the painting had been returned to Belgium. Not so much at stake because of the pieces that had been stolen by soldiers during the war, but the larger piece of the painting had been legitimately bought after the painting had been sold from Ghent in 1815.
According to historian Michael J. Kurtz, the Germans bitterly resented the loss of the panels. In their place in the German museum where they had once hung, a note was left reading, "Taken from Germany by the Treaty of Versailles." The Knoxville, Tennessee Journal reported that the space in front of the placards was a favorite spot on which to gather for a new strafing of the Allies, a perfect symbol spot to grouse about the humiliation and punishment doled out to Germany at the end of the Great War. The piece that was stolen was the Just Judges or Righteous Judges panel, along with its accompanying opposite side image, John the Baptist. The two pieces were actually separate, as they had been sawed apart in 1894, so both sides of the panel could be displayed at once. According to the newspaper The Guardian, when the theft was initially reported, the police commissioner only examined the scene briefly, as a large crowd had gathered, and instead returned to a case nearby that he had already been investigating, a theft on the same night, from a cheese shop. The police apparently had no clues, but the investigation was kept quiet. 19 days later, when a ransom note was sent to the Ghent bishop, the thieves demanded 1,000,000 Belgian francs for the return of the panels. According to the Staffordshire Evening Sentinel, the amount demanded was the equivalent to about £8,500. Adjusted for inflation, the demand was about £650,000 or $800,000. The letter included instructions for how the money would be passed to the thieves, as well as instructions for the bishop to respond in the small ads of a Belgian paper. The letter was signed D.U.A. The diocese passed the letter to the authorities, but declared themselves willing to raise the ransom.
Authorities, including agents of the Crown, were, however, more interested in catching the perpetrators. The government decided that since the painting was a national treasure, that the interests of the nation superseded those of the diocese.
Letters continued to arrive. On May 26, the third letter included a receipt for a luggage office in Brussels, where the thieves had left as a gesture of good faith the panel of the painting of St. John the Baptist. The railway employee could only say that the man who left the package was about 50 years old. The next letter demanded that the 1,000,000 francs be delivered to a vicar in Antwerp. The police instead gave the vicar only 25,000 francs, along with a letter of demands. On June 14th, a taxi stopped at the vicar's house in the afternoon, taking the package in exchange for a piece of newspaper. The vicar's housekeeper reported that someone in the back seat of the taxi was wearing glasses. Of course, the thieves were unhappy about the package. They stressed that they had risked their lives to take the panels, and that what they asked was not excessive. They called the police demands, primarily about how the panel would be exchanged, unacceptable. They now demanded that they would only return the panel after receiving the ransom, offering only to return the panel for 500,000 francs and for an additional 400,000 to be delivered a year later. If the offer wasn't accepted, the author wrote that it would result in the automatic destruction of one of the most beautiful showpieces of history. Letters and responses continued to pass in the following months, but little was gained, with the authorities refusing to budge and DUA continuing to threaten the panel. The 13th and last letter was received on October 2nd, offering again that the panel could be saved, but also including the following passage. "Please accept, Monsignor, my honorable regards, as well as my regret that you did not treat the people in this historical matter with enough dignity." No more letters were received. On November 25th, 1934, there was a meeting at the Holy Mary College in Dendermonde. One of the speakers, Arsène Hodetier, was struck by either a heart attack or stroke and forced to his deathbed. He told his lawyer that he was the only one who knows where the mystic lamb is, and directed him to an envelope in his desk. There, the lawyer found copies of the letters and a handwritten 14th letter. "I am the only one in this world who knows where the just judges rest," Hodetier wrote. "It rests," he said, "in a place where nor I nor anybody else can take it without catching the attention of the public." They found 3 keys, including one to a roof door at the cathedral in Ghent, and a luggage receipt to the typewriter on which he wrote the letters. The confession wasn't reported to the police for a month.
The authorities concluded that he was the thief, but the location of the painting remains unknown, even 90 years later. Ever since it was stolen, there has been a detective assigned to the case.
Mystery still surrounds the case. Whodunit was an odd man. He'd worked for the church, though not at the St. Bravo Cathedral, but by 1934 he worked as a stockbroker. He was a painter, an avid reader of detective novels, and himself an amateur detective who had followed various local cases. He had a collection of novels by Maurice Leblanc, in which a criminal communicated through newspapers with initials. Later investigation included a servant who recalled him being angry when she caught him wrapping up a long object in May of that year. Karel Mortier, chief of the Ghent police from 1974 to 1991, discovered a reference that Whodunit had night blindness, was too short to have committed the crime himself. The letters always use we in reference to other friends possibly involved. What few other suspects have been examined have not been proven to be involved.
Mortier also found out that Whodunit already had more than 1 million francs in the bank, making his motive less clear.
The police have been accused of bungling the case. They failed to question the lawyer or any of the other men who had been with Whodunit the day he died. They never looked for fingerprints on the letters or the typewriter, and not staked out post offices, although they knew where the letters were coming from. They didn't question Whodunit's wife, who said that her husband had made a few strange comments. "If I had to go looking for the panel, I would look outside of St. Bravo," he allegedly said. She also said that she heard him say the painting was only moved, not stolen. His sickly son, 13 years old, died just 6 months afterwards, muttering, "Police, thieves, police, thieves." The police became convinced that the painting was somewhere in or near the cathedral, but neither their searches nor extensive searches in the years since have found it. The man who was found to have committed the theft from the cheese shop and another witness claimed to have seen a black car at the cathedral the night of the robbery, and the cheese thief even identified the two men in the car 13 years later in 1947. One was a local smuggler, but the name of the other isn't certain, as the police seem to have never written the name down. During World War II, there was an effort to preserve the painting by sending it to the Vatican in Rome. The painting was en route when Italy joined the Axis, and so was instead stored at a museum in France. In 1942, it was seized by the Nazis at Adolf Hitler's direct order, and in 1945, it was recovered by the Allied Monuments, Fine Arts, and Archives program and returned to Ghent.
But the panel was still missing. In fact, after the Nazis seized the painting, they tried to track down the missing panel, but without success.
Mortier believed that there may have been a cover-up and that members of the church itself may have aided in the theft, possibly because they had lost money in investment, which could connect them to Whodunit, the stockbroker. And more mysteries abound. In 1938, a lawyer approached the government on behalf of an anonymous client, claiming to have the painting and offered to return it for 500,000 francs. The offer was turned down. The same year, another painter and famous restoration artist, Jan van der Wecken, made a copy of the work without any prompting. It has some differences from the original, but investigators have wondered, did he have on hand the original to use as a reference? Some even believe that he had merely painted over the original, although that has proven to be untrue. The copy was eventually sold to the cathedral and now takes the place of the original.
The only thing certain about the theft is that the piece remains missing. Since it was stolen, hundreds of different theories have arisen, from alleged conspiracies to the belief that Whodunit's last letter contained some sort of code.
None of it has made it any clearer what happened that April night. Was Whodunit the mastermind, a conspirator, or just a scapegoat? No one is sure, and except for him, no truly convincing suspects have been identified, and the panel itself remains officially lost, even while amateur and professional sleuths continue to try to solve this historical mystery.
Some believe that the painting was destroyed long ago, and others have spent decades poring through every clue and searching through every inch of the cathedral. In its most recent restoration, the copy of the Just Judges panel was not restored in order to emphasize that the original is still missing, and in the hope that it may yet be found. I hope you enjoyed this episode of The History Guy. Check out our community on thehistoryguideguild.locals.com, our webpage at thehistoryguy.com, and our merchandise at teespring.com, or book a special message from The History Guy on Cameo. And if you'd like more episodes on forgotten history, all you have to do is subscribe.